Welcome to The Writer's Dream. This is a show where authors can talk about how they write their books, how they publish their books, and how they market their books. You can find us on YouTube. Just look for Linda Maria Frank. That's who I am. Find my picture, click on it, and you'll see about 200 interviews from different authors. So if you're a reader or a writer, there's a lot of very interesting information for you. Today, we're going to do something different. Instead of speaking to an author, usually we speak to authors and we talk about writing and publishing, etc. But today, we're going to see what the reader thinks. We're doing this show from the reader's point of view. Our guest today is Mary Lambert. She is a teacher of literature and film for many years. We don't like to say how many, but very experienced. So, what makes you read a book? Why do you buy the books that you read? Authors really want to know what readers think because we want you to buy our books. So whether you like a real physical book or you do a virtual book or you mix them, what draws you to choose the books that you like to read? So let's take an imaginary tour or a virtual tour through a bookstore and see why you choose your next book. So I have a number of categories here, which we'll go through: genre, author, recommendations, appearance, and the book blurb. So Mary, what makes you read a book?
Well, probably the first thing is the genre. I really love historical fiction, so I'm usually drawn to that. But I like a lot of different kinds of books. So if we're taking a virtual tour of a bookstore, maybe the first thing I would do is look at the, like when you walk into Barnes and Noble, they're always on the table. And I'd probably take a look at some of the books there. And the next thing that I would do would be to look at the book jacket. And I know that that's an important thing because, for example, Linda and I both love the Outlander books. And the way that I chose my first Outlander book was I was the chairman of the English department at Kennedy High School. And we did a scholastic book fair. As you know, if you know anything about high schools and elementary schools, you do those things once a year. And as chairperson, I had to be there to, greet everybody and everything.
Yeah, Scholastic is a big publisher of books for young people, correct?
Right. But in this particular instance, I guess they were trying to think about not only appealing to young people, but also to their parents. Because, there was some times when there were lulls in the number of people that would be there. So I was looking around at the books and I saw this book. Here it is. Big, thick book. Love big, thick books. Okay. I looked at it and it said Voyager on it. And I thought, that sounds interesting. I turned it over. And it was a description of actually the second book in the Outlander series. I picked it up. I loved the description. It was time travel. It was historical fiction. It was romance. I mean, the big three for me. Okay. So I picked that up. I said, okay, I'm going to buy this one, bring it home. And as I'm looking around, there was the second one. Now, this goes back to the early 90s before anybody even knew what the Outlander books were all about. The second one, of course, that I picked up was Outlander, which was actually the first in the series. And of course, I brought them home, read them both, and that was all she wrote. I mean, I read every single one since. Linda actually gave me The Spanish Prisoner, which is also one of the, that involves those characters as well. And I mean, I was hooked and I'm still hooked. I love those books. I have the Outlander Companion, I've got the whole 9 yards. So
me too.
I love those books. And historical fiction is always my thing.
We're going through Droughtlander right now because they made it into a TV series, and because of COVID, they can't film. And so we're all anxiously waiting for season 6. There are 8 books, and the author is supposedly writing the 9th one, and she's been getting threatening letters, from what I understand, to please release the book. But I don't think she's going to do that until the series is over. You know, one of the things that strikes me when I go into a bookstore is that you are immediately barraged by all of the best-selling authors. And I can understand that. Marketing is a huge thing in the publishing industry. You have to be able to push those books. So that's the first thing you see. So if you happen to really love a particular author, then fine and dandy, you know, you'll immediately be drawn to those books. But there's a lot of marketing. If you are, you know, into how to sell your own book, you really notice what, you know, what they do in a bookstore. As far as genre is concerned, gee, there are so many that are interesting. And I agree with you, though. I look first at what's on the bestseller list, and then I'll look at the, like Barnes and Nobles has the staff recommends. Amazon does the same thing if you're doing it online. So yeah, that's I guess first. I go for mysteries first, mysteries and historical fiction. I do quite a bit of research still, because I do a lecture series, so I want something that's entertaining when I read, because I do some, you know, I do professional reading pretty much in my own field, and so I want to be entertained. How about author?
Yeah, I will go back to an author. If I like the author, I will go back. I mean, obviously, Diana Gabaldon. And another one that I've gone back to many, many times is Colleen McCullough. You know, she wrote The Thornbirds, which is where I, you know, historical fiction, romance, there you go. But then she also wrote The First Man in Rome, which is also historical fiction, but much more historical than fiction. And the Grass Crown comes after that, and a couple of others. So I will go for the author as well. I mean, you know, if you want to talk about very popular authors, I tend to go for American authors more, but not necessarily. I love Steinbeck, much more Steinbeck than Hemingway, for example. But
so you're talking about going back to the classics, more or less.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'll read the classics, but I love new. Like, for example, I just got back from my daughter-in-law who was reading it, is City of Girls, which is by Elizabeth Gilbert. And, you know, obviously a very modern author. I loved Eat, Pray, Love. So I'm looking very forward to reading that one. I haven't read it yet, but I'm really looking forward to it, because I just love the way she writes. And then if you want to talk about classical authors, I'm an English teacher. So I love language. So for example, a classical author like Virginia Woolf, you read her stuff, sometimes her sentences go on for pages, but they all make sense. I actually do go back and say, wait a minute, this can't possibly be all one sentence. And I go back and look at the punctuation and stuff, but language fascinates me. So good description is something I love. A page turner where the plot is something, you know, where everything's moving very fast. You know, the kind of book that most people will talk about, I can't put it down, I stayed up till 4 o'clock in the morning reading it, that kind of thing. So that kind of book will attract me. But then I'll give you another example that was purely out of the blue. I don't like science fiction. I don't like fantasy. I would never in a million years in a bookstore go to either one of those genre. Okay. But my nephew has decided he wanted to write a book. Now, he's very creative, but he's very into science, and he's very into science fiction. So his book is all about, it's insects and, you know, people, hives and things like this. But the characters that he has drawn are compelling. So even though the genre is not something I'd ever touch, I can't wait for the next chapter. In fact, you just sent me another chapter the other day, so I have to read. I can't wait for the chapters because the characters are really compelling. So that's another piece that you can look at in terms of what makes a book compelling.
Right, and oftentimes the books we read are from recommendations we're getting from friends, from book clubs, from Oprah, from when she used to do the book club. I don't know if she still does it. But for me, from the author's point of view, another thing that I look at is the appearance of the book. I am very attracted by the cover art and the book blurb on the back, simply because I'm trying to learn. As a person who's trying to, I produce books and try to sell them. I want to look to see what's what, or what I can make different about my book that'll stand out. So all of those things conspire to form the choices that we make. However, there are three major things, Mary, that we know about books, and that's plot, setting, and character. And so when you read that blurb, you want to get some taste about an interesting character, at least one, maybe several. The setting is very important to me. I tend to like books that are set in a place that's interesting. And then, of course, plot. So let's imagine that we're looking at a book by an unknown author. What is it about the appearance of the book, the quality of the cover art, the blurb on the back that causes you to open the book, read about the author or a more detailed summary, and possibly the table of contents that will make you choose the book? So let's talk about content and subject.
Okay.
Well, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go.
All right, so content for me is, again, I love historical fiction. I like to read a book and learn something. I love a good story, and it was interesting that you said you like a page turner, and that was the one thing, because I write stories for kids and they're generally mystery or adventure. I make it my point that the end of a chapter makes you go to the next chapter, because kids have to be, and adults as well. That's the thing, that I want to read the next chapter. Some of the books that I read I don't care if I ever read the next chapter, but I plug along. So definitely content. I think different people like different things. There are people who like nonfiction, and nonfiction books actually sell better than fiction books, because you're learning something, believe it or not, or it's something you need. It's like self-help books and psychological books and things like that. How to save your marriage, and oh God. Yes, don't laugh. I can't help myself. So it's a subject oftentimes that makes you choose it. And if you have two books on how to save your marriage, then what do you look at? You look at the cover, you look at the contents, and your marriage is probably suffering from some problem. It's either money or sex, and so you look to see how they treat that. So characters. Tell me about characters, Mary.
Well, talking about the front of a book, the front of a book, or the blurb on the back. A lot of times you can find a little bit about the character that way. And then, so I think you're very right about that what the book looks like is very important. So if let's say I really enjoy the front of the book, and then I turn it over and I look and I say, "Ooh, wow, this looks like a really interesting story." Perhaps the next thing I'll probably look at, you're right, is content. The table of contents. What's this book going to be about? And then to get me into, reading the first few pages, that's how I always test a book. If it interests me in the first few pages, I'm probably hooked.
Yeah.
Now, are there some books that don't really interest me in the first few pages? Yes. But usually I may continue them because the writing is beautiful. Mm-hmm. I really enjoy the writing. But I'll give you an example of a nonfiction, Rachel Maddow. So here's the front of the book. It's called Blowout. Okay. The front of the book just has it looks like some kind of explosion on the front. Turn it over. It's about the oil industry, the fossil fuel industry.
Right.
Now, so the first thing I looked at was it's Rachel Maddow. I love her.
Yes.
So this is going to be something that I might be interested in reading. I look at the back, it's about the fossil fuel industry. It's about Russia having that as their major economic, that's really basically the basis of their economy. So that's interesting to me.
Mhm.
So I open up the book and I look at the table of contents and wow, this looks like a really interesting book. And of course, that's why I bought the book, because it first of all, the author, second of all, what it said on the back, I'm interested in that. So it's content. I'm interested in the content. Same thing if we go back to Outlander books. I didn't know Diana Gabaldon at all at that point, but every time since I've seen a book by her, and she's written others besides Outlander ones, I've gotten involved in those too, because I enjoy what she writes. Once I'm into the book, it's usually character that will get me to go further. Plot, a lot of times, like I know people who love mystery stories usually get brought in by the plot. I tend to get it, a plot won't interest me that much unless the characters are well drawn. So if I'm talking about something like the Maltese Falcon, I have to really like Sam Spade.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
I don't like Sam Spade, I'm never going to be interested enough in getting into the book.
Mhm.
Alfred Hitchcock said once about his villains that he had to have, the villains all had to have something that was redeeming about them. Otherwise, nobody would ever watch the movie because they didn't care. And I think that same thing goes for books. You have to care about the characters. You also, I think, at least for me, and most of my students, I think this was true of as well, they have to identify in some way with the character.
Yes.
They have to see something in the character that they can hang their hat on.
Well, I think when you read the book blurb, if they say something in the book blurb about the character that relates to some aspect of your life, then I think you're more likely to pick up the book. Also, that's something as an author that when you take courses in writing, they'll tell you, it's easy to draw your protagonist, but the antagonists, the evil characters, so to speak, or the bad guys, make them complex. It makes a more interesting book. My argument that I would have with many English teachers that I knew was, I would say that Stephen King is like one of my favorite writers. I think he is a great writer. And the reason why is because I don't believe in vampires. I don't believe in, all this supernatural stuff and whatnot. Sort of, maybe not. But I have to find out what's going to happen to the characters. His characters are so believable, so human. He has this talent for making people human. They think the way you think. And I think that's a real talent, to be able to make your characters think the way you think, or think the way somebody thinks, or think if they're bad guys, think about some bad guy that you're aware of. But yeah, to me, it's the characters. I have to fall in love with the character. If I don't fall in love with the character, the book is a little tedious for me. Almost all the books that I will read another book by that author is, I like the character. If it's not the character, the plot has to be so into whatever field of science I'm interested at that time that I'll continue to read the book, and then that's content. But I think definitely characters. How about we talked about plot? Plot too is it depends on what you like about a book. Do you like to learn something about the book? This is a kind of a personal thing, but I think the thing that makes bestsellers is their treatment of characters. I really do. And setting, I think, in a book should be a character. You should make your setting a character. And if you do that, you really draw the reader in. You may know this, I hope I don't embarrass you. There's some author who talked about fog creeping in on cat's paws. something like
Oh,
that.
that's Carl Sandburg. That's yeah, Carl Sand. Yeah, Fog on Little Cat Feet.
Yeah, yeah, and
That's
I
fun.
think that that really makes the setting come alive. Um, I try to, in my books, make an interesting setting. The last book that I published, the setting is completely fictional. All of the other books, there were real places, but my setting was completely fictional. People are coming back to me after reading it. It's about a bunch of kids who live on an island. It's the island is somewhat isolated from the mainland, but not completely. And I did my best because everybody says it's Fire Island, isn't it? It's Fire Island. I said, no, it's not Fire Island. And it doesn't even in the descriptions come close. But yeah, but I like to deal with setting.
Well, one thing that I used to do with kids, I enjoy dealing with setting because setting often is really sort of a character. Um, and one of the things that I would do with kids I would say to them, okay, what would happen if you changed the setting? If you put it in a completely different place?
Interesting.
You know, would the characters react the way that they do? Would
Mhm.
the motivations of the characters, or would the, you know, just the setting alone, would it be something that would still be viable if you changed it in some way? Um, you know, that's a great thing to do with books that were written a while ago. Like, for example, take something like I'm trying to think of the name of the book now, where phones, for example, are part of the, like, I can't think of a book right now, but take the,
My last book, you were my beta reader. I made it. I
yeah,
set it in 1947 because I didn't want to have to deal with cell phones and the internet.
right. But you know, what would happen if you had put cell phones and the internet into that story?
Uh,
The whole story would have changed,
yes.
because the kids would have been more able to communicate with one another. They wouldn't have realized that what was her name, the girl was in trouble.
Oh yes. Janet.
Janet, thank you, I knew it was a
Janet
Janet.
Blue Smoke.
Yeah, that she was in trouble. You know, they none of that would have been able to be possible. So you had to set it where it was, or you know, it depends on what the setting is. But for example, if you're talking about a conflict, you know, we always just talk about man versus man and man versus nature and all that stuff. But say you're talking about man versus nature, and your book is, you know, set in some place where that's very important, and then you move it to a city, it's going to change the entire
Right.
what
Right.
happens in the book, because your characters aren't going to face the same things, the same problems, the same obstacles. So setting, to me, as you say, it's like it is a
Yeah.
character.
One of the things that we talk about on the show is writer's block. And I suggest when people say to me, what do you do about writer's block? Is I don't care where your book is set, but setting always has some information. So step back and research your setting. Even if you're talking about a small town in the southern United States, look up a small town in the southern United States, do a little research, and you might find some very interesting things to add to your story. We have about 3 minutes left, Mary. So, what's the next book you're looking for? Not your favorite book, the next, we'll get
Oh,
to
the
that.
next book I'm looking for, geez. Well, I'm just sitting here right now and I'm looking into my living room and I'm looking at a pile of about 6 books that are on my pile to read. One of them, strangely enough, most of them are nonfiction, which is not my normal
Yeah,
thing. You know, given the situation of the world right now, as you said earlier, you always want to learn something from a book that you read. So yeah, I have a couple there. I have Doris Kearns Goodwin about
yeah,
leadership.
yeah.
That I haven't. I mean, I got the book a long time ago. Went to see her at the 92nd Street Y, and the book was part of the ticket. So I have the book, but it's just, it's like on my pile that I haven't gotten a chance to get to
Mhm.
yet. But that's one. I also am just about ready to start, strangely enough, which everybody else in the world has read but me, and that's The Goldfinch.
Oh, the Goldfinch. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, I haven't read it. And it was interesting because my sister didn't like it because she said it was very plodding. So I think I kind of put it off for a while. But then I read, strangely enough, going back to the beginning of this thing, I read The Book Jacket, and it sounds really interesting because it's about art theft and art and all of that. Gee, somewhat like a book that you wrote, Linda.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe
And
I
also
should
the
read it and
lecture,
add
by
it
the
to my
way,
lecture, huh?
a lecture that Linda gives, which is really a wonderful lecture on art theft and the monuments men, about the Nazi
That
theft
was,
of art.
that was a nonfiction book that was really hard to read, but so interesting because it was so factual. So we are going to move on from, we have about a minute left, but we're going to move on to the second show in this series. I'm going to try to do this show more often from the reader's point of view, but the next show we're going to do is Mary's favorite book, which is
To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yes, To Kill a Mockingbird. I think that's almost everybody's favorite book. It certainly won Channel 13's favorite book, PBS's favorite book award. So so thanks, Mary. This was really, really interesting, getting into the mind of the reader and a little bit from the writer. And so fasten your seatbelts, people. We're going to be talking about To Kill a Mockingbird. Thanks so much.